I often find myself wondering how we got here, how everything in our life became tainted by silence. It wasn't always like this. When I first met Albert, I was drawn to his charisma, his charm, his ability to make me feel like I was the only woman in the world. He had a way with words, and he made me believe that he would protect me, that he was the man I had been waiting for. But that was before the alcohol took hold of him, before the light in his eyes dimmed and was replaced by something darker. I remember the first time I felt that change. We had been married for just a couple of years, and one night, after a long day of work, I noticed how Albert came home later than usual. I had prepared a warm meal, something to make him feel appreciated, but when he walked in, his eyes were already glassy. He wasn't the man I had married, he was someone else, a stranger in his own body. The first time he yelled at me, I was taken aback. It was just words, after all. Words can't hurt, can they? But the anger behind those words terrified me. And it wasn't just the anger, it was the look in his eyes. There was something behind that look, something that made me freeze in place. The first slap came soon after. It wasn't the kind of slap that stings your cheek. It was a shock to my entire body, a jolt of reality that left me numb. I didn't even cry out. I was frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. The man I loved, the man I had built my life with, was hitting me. And it didn't stop there. Over time, the physical abuse became routine, something I had to endure. But the real punishment was always in the silence after. Albert would yell, would hit, would demand things from me that were impossible to give, but then, after everything was over, he'd retreat into silence. He wouldn't talk to me for days, as if I were a stranger. The silence was deafening. I didn't know what I had done wrong, but I always felt like it was my fault. The worst part wasn't just the blows. It was the quiet moments when the kids were asleep, and Albert and I would sit across from each other, pretending everything was fine. I had to keep up the facade. I had to make them think their father was just having a bad day. I couldn't let them know the truth. How could I tell them that the man who was supposed to protect us was the one who hurt us most? How could I protect them from the terror I lived in every day? There were nights when I cried myself to sleep, not because of the pain, but because of the fear. Fear of what would happen to us, fear of what Albert might do next. And even more than that, I was afraid of the day I might lose my ability to protect my children. In the beginning, I thought we could make it work. I told myself that things would get better, that Albert's drinking was just a phase, that he was stressed from work, or that life had become too overwhelming for him. But those excuses quickly wore thin. I had to face the truth, this wasn't a phase, and it wasn't going to get better. The hardest part, though, wasn't the physical pain. It wasn't the bruises on my body or the cuts on my face. It wasn't even the fear of what might happen when Albert came home drunk. No, the hardest part was living in constant fear for my children. They were too young to understand why their father would lash out like that, and I couldn't explain it to them. I couldn't tell them that the man who should have been their hero was the one who caused them the most fear. It was the silence that ate at me, the kind of silence that followed every argument, every slap. After Albert would get violent, he would retreat into his shell, leaving me to pick up the pieces. He wouldn't speak to me for days, wouldn't look me in the eye. I could feel his anger still lingering in the house, like an invisible force that hovered in every corner. But I had to keep going. I had to keep pretending that everything was fine. I had no choice. I had to protect the children from the reality of what was happening, and that meant keeping the peace, no matter the cost. Money was another constant struggle. Albert drank away every penny we had. I couldn't remember the last time we had enough to eat, let alone save anything. The little money I managed to scrape together for the kids' clothes or food was never enough. Most nights, we went to bed hungry. I would eat as little as possible, just to make sure the kids had something. But there were nights when even that wasn't possible. I remember one night in particular. The kids were quietly playing with their toys in the corner while I tried to make dinner with the few scraps I had left. Albert had come home late, his breath thick with the smell of alcohol. He stumbled through the door, looking at me like I was some kind of inconvenience. I could see the anger in his eyes before he even spoke. "You're useless," he spat. "You couldn't even make me a proper dinner." I didn't respond. What was there to say? I had no money for a proper meal. I had nothing but a few potatoes and whatever leftovers I could find. But I didn't dare tell him that. I couldn't afford his anger tonight, not with the kids watching. I silently pushed the plate toward him, hoping that it would be enough to avoid the next fight. He looked at the food and then at me with disgust, muttering something under his breath. Then the yelling started. He began accusing me of being worthless, of ruining everything. The kids were still in the other room, and I could hear their little footsteps coming toward the kitchen, curious about what was happening. I told them to go back to their room, to stay away. They obeyed, but I saw the confusion and fear in their eyes. They didn't understand why their father was yelling, why their mother was so silent, why everything felt so wrong. I could see their faces, their eyes wide with confusion, and it tore me apart. I didn't want them to see this. I didn't want them to grow up thinking this was normal. But it was. This was their reality, and there was nothing I could do to shield them from it. I had no way out. Albert slapped me across the face for the first time that night. It didn't hurt as much as the realization that it had finally happened, that this was now my life. He pushed me to the ground, and for the first time in a while, I didn't try to fight back. I couldn't. It wasn't worth it. That night, after he passed out on the couch, I lay on the floor in the kitchen, unable to sleep. My body ached, but it wasn't just physical pain, it was the crushing weight of everything I had been hiding for so long. The anger. The fear. The loneliness. I lay there listening to the soft breaths of my children, wondering how long I could keep pretending that everything was okay. I couldn't leave. I couldn't risk Albert turning on them. The fear of what he would do to me or to the kids if I ever sought help kept me trapped in this cage, this prison of silence. I had grown accustomed to the silence of Albert's anger, the silence of my own suffering, and the silence that filled the house after another night of violence. I had learned to live with it, to breathe through it, to hope that it would end. But deep down, I knew it never would. Every day was the same. Every night ended with me afraid to close my eyes, terrified of what the morning would bring. Albert's drinking had become worse over time, and with it, the violence. It had become so predictable. I could tell by the way he swayed when he walked through the door if he was in the mood to fight or if he just wanted to pass out on the couch. Sometimes, the violence would come without warning, out of nowhere. Other times, it was triggered by something small, like the way I looked at him, or the way the kids were playing too loudly. It didn't matter. What mattered was that it always happened. That night, I had done my best to stay out of his way. I had prepared the kids for the worst, quietly telling them to stay in their room, to be silent, and not to come out. They knew the drill by now. But that night was different. It wasn't just the usual arguing. It wasn't just the typical threats. I don't know what sparked it, but the violence came fast. Albert started yelling, his words slurred and harsh. I didn't even have time to brace myself before the first hit landed. I tried to shield myself, but it was useless. I could feel the blood begin to trickle down my face, my mouth stinging, but it didn't matter. I was used to this. Then, something happened. Something I never expected. I heard a voice. A voice outside the house, calling for help. At first, I thought it was just part of my delirium, the echo of a cry trapped in my own mind. But the voice grew louder. Someone was outside. Someone had heard. Albert stopped. He turned toward the door, confused, angry. I could feel his rage intensify as he went to the door, ready to lash out at whatever was disturbing his chaos. But before he could reach it, the door burst open. I didn't see the man at first. But what I did see was Albert's reaction. He froze, stunned, like he had never seen anything like this before. A stranger, a passerby, had entered the house. The man's presence was strong, his movements swift and deliberate. Albert tried to push him away, but the stranger didn't back down. I could see the determination in his eyes. He wasn't afraid. With one quick motion, the stranger grabbed a frying pan from the stove and struck Albert, knocking him to the ground. For the first time in years, I saw Albert on the floor, unable to move. The stranger didn't stop. He immediately called the police, ensuring that Albert would be taken away. It was all so surreal. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid. I could breathe. I could think clearly. The stranger, the one who had saved me, didn't question why I hadn't left, didn't ask me anything at all. He just made sure we were safe. As the police arrived and took Albert away, the stranger stayed with me. He didn't leave. He didn't rush off. He stayed until everything was sorted out, waiting with me, making sure the kids were okay. He didn't look at me with pity or judgment. He just looked at me with kindness, something I hadn't seen in so long. The police took Albert away that night, and it felt like the weight of years of fear had finally lifted. I stood there, staring at the empty space where he had once been, trying to process what had just happened. I had always feared that the moment would come when I couldn't protect myself or my children anymore. I had never imagined that someone else would intervene, that someone would hear our cries and step in. Stan, the man who had saved me, stayed long after the police left. He made sure we were okay, that we had what we needed, and in the days that followed, he continued to check in. At first, I thought he would disappear, just like most people do when they see the mess someone else is in. But he didn't. He kept coming back. I didn't know how to react to him at first. I had been so used to living in fear, to hiding everything, that I wasn't sure how to let someone in. But Stan was patient. He didn't rush me. He just showed up, bringing groceries, offering help with the bills, and making sure the house was safe. His kindness was so different from what I had known that it felt almost foreign. One evening, when the kids were asleep, I sat down with him in the kitchen. We talked for hours. I told him about Albert, about the years of fear, about how I had been too scared to seek help. I told him how hard it had been to live in silence, to pretend that everything was fine when it wasn't. Stan listened, really listened, in a way no one had ever done before. There was no judgment in his eyes, no disbelief. He just sat there, understanding, offering me the comfort I hadn't realized I needed. As the days turned into weeks, I began to let go of the fear that had held me captive for so long. Stan didn't just rescue me from Albert's violence, he gave me the space to heal, to breathe. For the first time in years, I felt like I could stand tall again. Stan started helping with the kids, playing games with them, making them laugh. Slowly, he became part of our lives, a steady presence in a world that had once been filled with chaos. The kids, who had been so scared of their father, began to smile again. They weren't afraid anymore. They were starting to feel safe, and so was I. I knew that things couldn't go back to the way they were. Albert was gone, and I had no desire to ever see him again. But I also knew that I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. I couldn't just survive, I needed to live. And Stan helped me do that. Slowly, gently, he became part of our family, someone who cared for us without asking for anything in return. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch, watching the children play in the yard, I realized that I was smiling. Not because everything was perfect, but because it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I was allowing myself to hope. Stan never once pressured me or asked for more than I was willing to give. He gave me the time and space I needed to heal. And in doing so, he became someone I could trust, someone who showed me that not all men were like Albert. It took a long time to let go of the fear, to let go of the shame. But with Stan's help, I started to believe that I could rebuild my life, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but it was real. I was learning to smile again, learning to trust again. And soon, Stan was more than just a stranger who had saved us. He was family. Reading this story filled me with an overwhelming mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a profound sense of empathy for Bertha. The way she slowly loses herself, piece by piece, is heartbreaking. The silence she lives in, the isolation she endures, and the constant fear she feels are devastating. And yet, even though she is surrounded by violence, there's a quiet strength within her, a strength that keeps her going, that keeps her protecting her children, even when she feels like she has no fight left in her. What stands out to me the most is how Bertha has been conditioned to accept the abuse as part of her reality. She tries to shield her children from the truth, putting on a facade of normalcy, but the emotional toll of living in constant fear and silence is so heavy. Her silence becomes her prison, and it's tragic to see how she justifies the abuse, telling herself that it's just a phase, that it will get better. The fear that Bertha feels is real and raw. She is not just afraid for herself but for her children too. Her fear of Albert's wrath keeps her trapped, unable to seek help, unable to escape. The way she has been conditioned to suppress her pain is painful to witness. It's so easy to see how victims of abuse become trapped in this cycle of violence, believing that they have no way out, unable to imagine a life beyond the abuse. The emotional and physical toll on Bertha is enormous. What is even more heartbreaking is the realization that this kind of silence is what so many people in abusive situations experience. The isolation, the loneliness, and the confusion of trying to protect their loved ones while enduring immense pain. It's a crushing weight that's almost impossible to comprehend unless you've been in those shoes. But as painful as this story is, there is a glimmer of hope, especially when the stranger, Stan, enters the picture. His unexpected intervention is a stark reminder that there are people out there who care, who are willing to risk their own safety to help those in need. Stan represents the possibility of rescue, the promise that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. Advice and reflection. If you or someone you know is in an abusive relationship, please know that you are not alone. It's easy to feel like there is no way out, especially when fear keeps you from taking action. But there are resources, there are people who want to help. Silence is not the solution, and seeking help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. To those who are reading this and might be in a similar situation, please understand that your safety and well-being are important. If you are in immediate danger, please reach out to local authorities or a trusted individual. There are shelters, hotlines, and support systems that can provide you with the tools and guidance to break free from an abusive situation. To anyone who might witness abuse, like Stan did, don't stay silent. Your intervention could save a life. Sometimes, simply being a voice for those who can't speak up, or helping them access the support they need, can change everything. And to Bertha, and to anyone living with similar pain, remember that you deserve happiness, safety, and love. You don't have to live in fear. There are people who will listen, people who will help, and people who will stand beside you. It may take time, but you can heal, and you can rebuild your life. Please, don't let silence be your prison.